I always say that
Yeah.
the graveyard, is the place where dreams die, because so
Mm.
many people die before they ever fulfill their dreams. And you know what? Failing, and this is going to be hard for some of your audience to understand, failing is the greatest thing that can happen to you, because
Yeah.
when you succeed, you don't really learn.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Chris Naugle with me. Chris is the owner and founder of the Money School, and one of the things that I think you're going to hear about his journey is if you're willing to knock on a lot of doors, eventually you'll find the one that speaks to you most. So, Chris, thanks so much for being on today, my man.
Oh, it's an honor. Thanks for having me on, Phil.
Yeah. So to start your journey, as a young man, you started working around, in your teenage years. So talk a little about, that idea of work ethic and, working early and learning the value of a dollar at an early age.
Yeah, I mean, I just grew up in a family that didn't have any money,
Mm.
and anything I wanted, which back when I was a kid, I wanted mini bikes and dirt bikes and go karts and fun things, right, that I could rip around the backyard. So I actually started my working career with my best friend Jack's dad, Rick, and we worked on the farm. So we would literally, it got me in the habit of getting up early. So that's like
Yeah.
a big takeaway. At the moment, I hated it, but
Yep.
then like looking back, I'm like, that's why I'm an early bird. I used to get
Yeah.
up before the sun. I didn't have a ride to work, so I would literally, we carved out trails from my house to the farm. So I rode my dirt bike or my four-wheeler to the farm, and that's how I did it. And that was at 14 years old. And then from there, when I got to be 16, I did what every kid pretty much did back then, and got a job at a restaurant, and did that whole thing. And that's kind of where, I'm 16 years old. I'm working at this restaurant. It was like my second restaurant I'd worked at. And they treated me awful. It was an Italian restaurant. I swear to you, I could do nothing right by this guy's, lens. And he had this thing. And I look back and I'm like, he did this intentionally. He would send me out to the storage like freezer, which was out like behind the parking lot, to get
Yeah.
something. He'd say, "Hey, go out and grab this." And I'd go out there. I would dig through that entire freezer looking, and I'd come back. At first it was no big deal. Hey, I couldn't find it, and then he'd go off the handle. Oh, I should have done it myself, blah, blah, blah. But this happened over and over. And there was one day he sent me to the cooler in the front, like just in the restaurant area.
Yeah.
And I went in there and I knew what he asked for and I knew right where it was, and it wasn't there. And I
Mm.
came back out and I knew it. I knew it was going to happen. So I'd prepared for it, and he went right into me.
Sure.
Same old thing he did, and that was the day I quit. But you see, I'd been preparing for this moment, because I
Yes.
didn't, Mom wasn't the type of person that I could just go home and be like, "Hey, Mom, I quit my job." No,
Yeah.
no plan. I had to have a plan. I don't know if that was in me or just like what I was brought up, doing with my mom, but I had planned out that when I got done working at this place, I didn't know that was going to be the day I was going to quit. But
Yeah.
when I did, I was going to start a clothing line. I'd been
Yeah.
talking with my art teacher, Mr. Mahalski, about printing shirts and selling them out of my backpack. And that's exactly what I did. That moment was the catalyst where I said, when I left that restaurant, I said, I'm never working for anyone again. Now, that isn't exactly how it shaped out, but I pretty much was self-employed for the rest of the period of my life up to this point, with a couple minor Wall Street, jobs, I guess you would call, but I was still an independent contractor.
Yeah. Now, so to talk about that, you quit that job, you start your own company, and your mom was willing to help you get started on that company. So talk a little about having the belief from someone else. I think,
Oh,
someone listening today is in that same spot as you, Chris. Maybe they're not 16 years old or 17 years old, maybe they're, 46 years old, and they're like, gosh, I really don't love what I'm doing, and I feel like I should be doing this, but they either haven't, explored somebody that believes in them yet, or no one has, come forth and said they believe in them yet. But talk a bit about the power of that in your journey.
yeah, I think you're right. I think everybody crosses that moment in their life. It doesn't matter what age they're at. Some people, maybe at 60, they decide, holy cow, I've been doing this thing. I hate it. I got to do something different. And my moment was right there. That was the moment it happened. Now, if you ever watched the movie Rudy, and I got to know
Yeah.
Rudy pretty well. We hired him as a speaker, and I just love the guy. But in that
Right.
movie, he had two people that believed in him. He had his brother, who then passed away, and then he had the janitor of all
Yeah.
people. But that was his unconditional one, which is what I always call that one person, right?
Mm.
Ed
Mhm.
Milet calls it the one. I call it the unconditional one.
Yeah.
And that was my mom. My mom always believed in me. She didn't have anything, really, that she could help me with. So here's how that whole thing shaped up. So remember, I started this clothing line. I'm selling the clothes out of my backpack, having my buddies sell it. I'm driving to snowboard competitions, stopping at skate and snowboard shops, and wholesaling my clothing. All of things that I just learned on the fly and just
Yeah.
probably screwed it all up, but it was fun. And then I got this idea one day stopping at a shop. It was Hardpack was the name of the shop. It was in Canandaigua, New York. And the owner, like, I went in, he bought a small order from me. It was like $600, but to me that was like $600. I'm like, dude, I'm rolling.
Yeah.
So, but then he says something crazy to me. He says, "Hey, Chris, do you want to go snowboarding?" So I look around. This is about 11 a.m. in the morning, give or take a few minutes. And I'm looking around. There's no one else, just us two in the shop. And I kind of said to him, I said, "Sure, when do you want to go?" And he says, "Let's go right now."
Yeah.
And I'm like, I just said, "Is someone coming in to work the shop?" Like, I'm in
Yeah.
my mind being the responsible, I was probably 16, 17 at this time, kid. I'm like, somebody's got to be working, this shift instead of you. He's like,
Yeah.
"No, I own the place. I'll just close it. Let's go ride." And we did. But from that moment on, it was sunk in my head like that was freedom. Right?
Yeah.
This
Yep.
guy created this environment, this shop that allowed him at any time to shut the door and go do what he loved to do. That
Yep.
was it. So I came home, and for 6 months, and I kid you not, might even been 7 months, I did nothing but work on business plans, go to the small business development center, work with the teachers there or the staff there to help me do my business plan. I took
Yeah.
my business plan to every bank, got told no by everybody, got told no by everybody in my family. My dad made it seem like I was a damn fool for going about doing this, and I should just go get a job at the factory. We'll leave dad out of this and what happened after that with him. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, my mom watched all this happen. There
Yeah.
was one bank, M&T Bank, that said, "Hey, kid, we love your idea. We'll give you an SBA-backed loan, but we need collateral." I swear I didn't know what collateral was. And
Yeah.
I'm like, "Can you tell me?" I didn't know how to ask, but I'm just like, "Can you tell me what that is?"
Yeah.
He's like, "Well, it's assets, things that you own that would support the loan," which was a $70,000 loan. Because I wanted to open a
Yeah.
snowboard shop called Fat Man.
Yeah.
And I was, all I had in the world was a 1986 Buick Skyhawk, a KX 125, and a Wicked baseball card collection. And that
Yeah.
wasn't good enough. So when I told my mom this, she could see it probably in me that, like, the dream was dying. Like, the dream was pretty much dead. This was the last stop
Yep.
on in this journey. And she said to me, she said, "So you said collateral." And she said something funny to me, and I didn't put it together right at the moment, but my mom, the unconditional one, said, "This house, what about the house?"
Mm.
And I'm like, "What do you mean, our house? Your house?" Like, my mom had got the house in the divorce, and she said, "Yeah, there's probably 75,000 in equity here that we could, she said we, not I,
Yeah.
we could put the house up for collateral."
Amazing.
Now, I was 17, so I'm like, "Yes, it's go time. Fat Man's going to open," which it did, November of 1994. But, like, think about that moment. Like, I know how we're talking about, like, moments and
Yeah.
reflecting back. Like, my mother, the only thing she owned in the world was her house, our house, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, 700 square foot house, just to let everybody know how I grew up.
Yeah.
She believed in me so much that she didn't even question it. She just put the house up for collateral. And
Yeah.
I almost sometimes think that right there, that moment when I signed that loan document for that SBA loan, I became a man. Like,
Mhm.
I was a teenager, but I very quickly became a man because the realization came every day when I was in that shop that if I fail, I lose mom's house. I
Yeah.
didn't think I lose our house. I lose mom's house. Mom always
Mm.
looked at it as our house. So sorry that was long winded, but, like, honestly, like, that's that moment. That's that unconditional one in my life. And I had several of them. My mom, my art teacher, Mr. Mahalski, my accounting teacher, Mr. Crawley. Like, everyone has that moment we talked about, but everybody has that one or maybe several people in their life that believe in them. And you have to, because
Yeah.
sometimes you just hit dead ends and you need somebody to pick you up. That's it. And if it's not God, it's got to be someone that's close to you.
So good. Now, I think sometimes, as we get older, we think about, how unrealistic something is or how like maybe careless that idea would be. Whereas when you're young, you probably didn't even think about careless. You're like, sweet, this is the gate to or the opportunity that I now have. And so I think there is something to be said about, like youth or just saying, hey, I'll figure it out, right? And like not overthinking it. Now there's also something to be said about there's plenty of businesses that fail because you didn't think enough. So there's this fine line. But what would your word of encouragement or advice be to somebody that's running a business or thinking about taking the next step, but they've been over analyzing and really it's not, they don't need to think anymore about the decision, they just need to take action on it?
I've been on this earth 48 years. I currently run and operate 16 companies, and I've had many more than that. Many did not make it. I've had lots of failures. And the thing I always tell people is you can spend your entire life dwelling on things, thinking of your ideas, looking at your dreams, analyzing your dreams, trying to find all the faults in everything, or you can just do what I guess I did and just leap. And I'm not saying that that's always the right choice, the leap.
Yeah.
But if you don't leap, you're going to look back someday in your life and you're going to be like, I shoulda, I coulda, I woulda. And listen, there's no mistake about this. And I'm being honest. Like, I've had a
Yeah.
lot of successes, but I've had just as many failures, maybe more. And if you ask me, hey, tell me all your greatest successes, I would tell you my failures. I would tell you my failures are my greatest successes because without them, I could have never got where I'm at now. Without a door slamming in my face, someone telling me no, a business failing, a financial loss, whatever it might be, I could not have learned the fundamental things that I needed to learn to get me to the next step. And I'm a very faithful man. I
Good.
also believe God tests us and puts us in very difficult positions to not to be mean, not to put us in a rough place, but to literally test to see if we're
Yeah.
ready to take that next step. And so many people fail. They don't take the leap. And I just think that's one thing, no matter who's listening to this, if you don't just go for it, win or lose, if you don't just go for it, you're going to look back someday in your life and you're going to question that and you're going to take it to the grave. So just go for it. If it doesn't work, great. You learned and you move to the next one. It's going to have a little pain, but you're going to make it to the next stage.
You're so spot on. Now, talking about, taking the leap of faith, taking the challenge on. So you get the loan, you start the shop, but also you're being a professional snowboarder simultaneously, which I'm sure has its benefits from like a marketing standpoint and a connection standpoint and an exposure standpoint, but also probably draws attention away from your ability to just focus on business operations. So talk a little bit about that juggling act of, opening the store and also being, in the snowboarding world.
Y- You know, I'm thinking about that as you're saying that. Like, did me owning the shop, and eventually it was shops, did owning those shops take away from my professional snowboarding career? And it's really hard for me to say that it did.
Mm.
If if I look back and I think of all the moments, the shop never held me back from going to a competition I wanted because I had staff. So I would just have Randy or Nate or somebody come in and work my shift if I wanted to go somewhere. And listen, I surfed a lot too. And I surfed on the Great Lakes, which means literally when it's windy, you drop everything and you go surf. So I'd pick the phone up and be like, hey, Randy, do you want some hours? Do you want to swap shifts? You take the 10 to 4, I'll work the 4 to 9. I want to go surf because surf's up. And that's how I did it. So the shop only helped me catapult my career. Like you mentioned, it gave me the brand. It was a rider-owned and operated shop. I went on to be pro, so that gave the brand, the
Yeah.
Fat Man brand, credibility that it was owned by a professional rider. But I can't think of one time that shop held me back from my career. Now, there is one thing that maybe it held me back in the sense that it kept me where I'm at. I've always lived in Buffalo, New York. And for any of you that know, sorry, I just kicked my camera. Any of you that know, Buffalo, New York is not the mecca for snowboarders.
Yeah.
There's been to date 3, including myself, professional snowboarders that made it out of Buffalo, New York. I'm sorry, 4, because there was one Olympian, but he wasn't Buffalo. He was, I think, Rochester.
Wow.
So let's call it 4 that made it out of this area. It's not the Mecca. So
Yeah.
I had to work way harder than other riders that maybe grew up in Cali and Mammoth and in the hot spots, you know. And back then, the hot spots were actually Vermont. So every weekend, I would drive to Vermont, which I had the freedom to do because I owned the shop that people were working on the weekends. I would just take extra shifts during the week to
Yeah.
cover the weekend shifts. That's how I did it. I always kept the hours the same. And the one thing that it did, though, is it kept me grounded here.
Mm.
And I think if I didn't have the shops, and actually, let me go one step further than the shops, my mom. I am an only child. I am all my mom has.
Yeah.
People throughout my entire life are like, why do you still live there? In Buffalo? Really? You still live there? You know, why didn't you move to Utah, the hot spot?
Yeah.
And I always tell them because if I left, like, I would leave my mom. And my mom is, I'm the only thing she's got. Now that I have my little one, Vivi and my mom are best friends. So I would never take that away from my mom. That would just, to me, be the most selfish thing. I was
Yeah.
able to make it against all odds, I guess, you know, as a pro snowboarder, living in Buffalo, running the shops. But it was perfect. It was literally like living a dream. Like I wouldn't change a moment of it.
It's amazing. Now, as you're running the shops, you're snowboarding, this date in 2001 happens.
Mm.
So talk a little bit about, you're running the business and really, I mean, things that are, I mean, relatively outside of your control, impact you in a significant way.
Yeah, outside of your control, but you could read the Serenity Prayer, and you know you should just focus on things you can control and
Yeah.
know the difference. But
Yep.
really, here's what happened: 2001. For some of you, you're probably too young to remember. That was pretty much the heat of the dot-com recession,
Yeah.
and I'd never been through a recession up to this point. I mean, up to that point, you got to remember, I was a pro snowboarder. I had now at that point I had 3 shop locations, and we had just opened a new shop in Orchard Park. It's kind of like a little suburb that's out by the hills, you know, and it was more affluent because it's where the Buffalo Bills stadium is. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of wealthy people that live there. So we opened this really cool boutique. It was doing well. You know, it was brand new, highly leveraged to get it open. And then all of a sudden, this thing happens, right? This thing that I see on the news, the recession, the dot-com bust happens. And it was almost like a light switch. Like when I leave the shop, I'd flip the light switches off, right? It was kind of like that. Business dropped 30% instantly overnight. And I
Yeah.
just couldn't afford it. I didn't plan for it. I couldn't afford a 30% drop. And let me parallel that to the current, and then I'm going to just
Yeah.
pause that story, and I'm going to come to right now. As a warning to anybody that's listening to this, we are at that very moment right now. We are at a moment where we're right on the verge of a major meltdown, of some type of an economic fallout. I do this for a living. I study this like no one's business. It's boring stuff, but I'm telling you, like, what happened to me in 2001 is about to happen again. It might be different, and they're always different, but it's going to be the same thing. And when I wasn't ready, it brought me to my knees.
Mm.
But again, you know, because this show is all about these moments, right? Like,
Right.
it brought me to my knees. I almost lost everything. I couldn't even make my lease payment on my ZR2S10, which was, this is going to make people laugh, $199 a month. I couldn't even
Yeah.
pay that. So I literally, my buddy Mike worked at Little Caesars. So I'm like, okay, to make my bills, I didn't have a lot of bills. Pro snowboarders sort of just are nomads. We just travel and, you know, just live on couches and other people's
Yeah.
floors. But I had some bills, and I'm like, I'll just go get a job delivering pizzas. I went to Little Caesars, thought this is a shoe, and he gave me a good recommendation, and they turned me down. They weren't even looking for drivers because, well, it's a recession. People, I guess, aren't buying as much pizza. So
Yeah.
I did what most of you would do. I put a resume out there. My resume, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, fit on one piece of paper because all I
Yeah.
had done in my life is grown up, went to high school, 2 years of college, just community college, and then I was a business owner. That was it. And a
Yeah.
pro snowboarder. Like, that was my resume. And lo and behold, like the only people that called me back, and I got 2 calls out of the resume going out, and they were both Wall Street firms, 2 different firms. I interviewed with both, ended up with one, left them, and went to the other one. So when we talk about like that moment that brings you to your knees, like that location, that store, we had the .com bring us to our knees. Then the town, I don't know why, decided to rip up the entire street, redo all the sewer lines, all
Mm.
the water lines, right on the street where my new store was. So it wasn't just the recession. You could barely get to my location. And if you
Yeah.
got to my location, your car was dirty, dusty, and you drove through some nasty things if you didn't have a 4x4. So, like, all that happened, and we eventually had to close that store, absorb it into another one. But you know what? That was my in. So that like got me to change the hats. Like I went from skateboard, snowboard guy wearing a toque to now like I'm putting a suit on every day,
Yeah.
slicking my hair back like Gordon Gekko, and I'm a Wall Street guy. And I
Yeah.
did that for 16 years. But like again, that one door closed or
Yeah.
partially closed and another door opened. But it wasn't the door I wanted, not even
Mm.
close. But I learned the skills that allowed me to get to where I'm at today. So just important lessons in life. Don't ever think that a failure or a bad thing that happens to you isn't because it's supposed to.
So good. Now, I also think sometimes, people listening say, well, I couldn't make this pivot. I didn't go to school for that, or I've never done that before. And I think the reality is, and your story is, as we will keep going, is just living proof of it, is it's less about, what's your background and what are the transferable skills you have that you can place into different arenas. It just depends on, where you're at and what you need it for. So for you, hey, I ran a business, but clearly you had great personal skills, right? Because you knew how to be an employer, you knew how to sell. Like there was a lot of transferable skills into a next industry. So for you, were you excited moving into Wall Street? Was it, hey, I just know I need something to, pay the bills? Talk a little bit about that transition for you.
I certainly was not excited about putting a suit on, and not just a suit, it had to be a gray, blue, or black suit every day. So the only way I got through that is there's a company called Volcom, and oftentimes when I'm
Yeah.
doing these podcasts, I'm almost always in Volcom clothes. But back then, Volcom, for their athletes, which were like Shaun White and a couple others, they made suits for like the Riders Awards.
Yeah.
And I was good friends with the rep, so I called the rep up, Dan, and I'm like, Dan, you got to get me some of those suits, man. I need a gray one, a blue one, and a black one. And he did. He delivered. I got those suits, and I wore Volcom suits to the office. And that was like that bridge, because every time I'd look down and see the little Volcom stone, and it just brought me back. Hey, I'm still a snowboarder. I didn't
Yep.
give up. I didn't abandon my dream and my passion, and I didn't change who I am. But I got to do this. This is just what I got to do. And I think I want to go back to, there's a ton of people, and I see people like this all the time. So this is a really good question for me, and a passionate one, because what we do, we talk to thousands of people, every
Yeah.
year, and I hear this all the time, that people don't do something, or they won't go into doing something because they feel like, oh, I didn't go to school for that, or I don't know that. Like I was a snowboarder running a snowboard shop. So there was some transferabilities, and I'm glad you called it out. Like I was a good sales guy, right?
Yeah.
Because I sold snowboards and skateboards and clothes to people every day. So I had that, but I didn't know a darn thing about stocks, Wall Street, mutual funds, and annuities, life, and I knew nothing about that. I had to learn
Yeah.
those skills. But if anyone wants to listen to something really important that'll change the way you do everything, listen to Earl Nightingale's The Strangest Secret in the World. I literally geek out to Earl Nightingale in Napoleon Hill, but just start with that one. It's 27 minutes long. If you have a worthy idea, let's just say my worthy idea is I'm going to be the best financial advisor I can
Yeah.
be. That's my worthy idea. I am not coming from a family of financial advisors, never worked with them, didn't go to school for this. I have no background in this, no skills at all to pay the bills as an advisor. But I had that worthy idea. And I'll tell you, when I went into that firm, I was very observant. I was just a little kid. I was the pond scum. Sat in the cubicles, dialed the phone every day, all day long for these guys. Made barely any money. Like couldn't even afford to go to lunch when they went to lunch, which was a blessing, not a curse. Like
Yeah.
when they all went to lunch, they'd always ask, and I would kindly like, oh, I got too much to do. I can't. It was because I didn't have any money, right?
Yeah.
So, but during lunch, what I did is I pounded the phones, and I found something. During lunch, people answered the phone. And then
Yeah.
I found that when they all left at 4:30 in the afternoon, because they were bell rang, those guys were gone. 5 was like ghost town. I
Yeah.
stayed. I stayed
Yeah.
6, 7. I had no family, and I pounded the phone. And guess what? People answered, and
Yeah.
people talked to me, and people set up appointments. So when they went home, I went out and I saw people at their kitchen tables. In a very short period of time, I think it was 2 or 3 years, I became the top new org agent, which I was a new guy, so I was part of this new org. And then very shortly after that, I became number 3 in that office. Listen, like the thing I'm trying to explain is I had no real world skills, no education, no training as an advisor, none. I was self-taught, self-learned, but I was observant, but I had that worthy idea, and I never, ever gave up on it. And that's the secret to life. Don't
Yeah.
think you need to know everything. I know we live in a time where, we've been all taught you got to go to college, you got to get the degree. But like, look at the stats on that right now. You got a
Yeah.
whole generation, Gen Z, like failing. And no
Yep.
disrespect, but they were given a false set of beliefs. Go to
Yep.
school, get your bachelor's, get your master's, and you're gonna get a good job. Not anymore. Like,
Yeah.
sorry, the plumber that just fixed your toilet's making 3 times as much as some of the attorneys out there.
Yep.
I'm just calling it out as it is. Don't take offense to it. But like, sometimes you got to just believe in yourself more than believe in what you're told.
I love it. Now, you entered Wall Street in '01, which is a interesting time to do that. And then about 8 years later, you enter into the real estate world in '09, which is also a interesting time to make that pivot. But from a financial standpoint, wise times to do both, right? As Mr. Warren Buffett says, when there's blood in the streets, go ahead and buy. So talk a little bit about, making that transition into the real estate world and starting to build your way up to, I think you end up getting to about 30 different doors. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that would have been 2009. Now remember 2008 was the Great Recession. I
Yeah.
owned my stores. I'm a financial advisor, but I also had just bought a dilapidated paint store that I was in the midst of converting into a strip mall where I was going to move my store to. Instead of paying rent, I was going to, move my shop in there, and I was going to have tenants pay the mortgage. Well, little did I know that the Great Recession was going to hit right mid of me building this thing out. I almost went bankrupt. But my
Yep.
real estate journey actually, and I don't really talk about this a lot, didn't start in '09. I
Okay.
talk about that often because that was the blood in the streets. And I had read Warren Buffett's book, and he said, buy low. And I'm like, dude, real estate's low, stocks are low, but I'm going to try this real estate thing. And I took every
Yeah.
dollar I made because I started getting back on my feet. I had sold my retail stores, the Fat Man, in 2010. They're thank God they're still open today. It's pretty awesome legacy. But I had a little bit of cash and I put it all into real estate, and that's how I did it. And from 2009 to 14, I got up to 36 units. We'll come back to that. Let me pause that story. 2006 was the first time
Okay.
that I ever got into real estate. And it was a flip. I did my first flip in '06, my second flip in '07. In '08 was the development project that I just mentioned. But the reason I got into real estate wasn't because I went to some seminar or anything. I had this client, and I remember this guy vividly, and I knew him through the store. He brought his kids in to buy snowboards, and I knew he was in real estate. But the dude, like, legitimately was wealthy, and you just knew he was. His kids
Yep.
bought the top end stuff. As a shop owner, when your wealthy clients walk in. You just know.
Yep.
And one day I just got in a long conversation with him, and those conversations continued. I just said, "What do you do?" He's like, "Well, I do real estate." And I said, and he became a client of mine. We opened up some 529 plans for his kids and some other things, but he would never give me any sizable money. And at this point now I know his assets. I'm like, dude, come on, share. Like, come on,
Yeah.
give me a shot. Give me a shot. And he
Yeah.
never did. And I just asked him one day, I said, I got to ask you, we're kind of friends now. You never give me a shot to manage your money. And he says, it's not anything to do with you. He says, I'm a real estate investor. I
Mm.
can make more money in real estate in something that I fully control and that I understand versus giving you money to invest, which might work out really well, but
Mm.
I just know the outcome here.
Yeah.
And he said, you should get some real estate. It's going to be one of the greatest investments you'll ever make. And then he told me more millionaires were made from real estate than anything else. So that was why I got into real estate. The
Yeah.
first flip was a train wreck, like some of yours.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to make 40 grand because that's what I just had in my head. And I
Yeah.
think I
Right.
made 8 grand after a year and a half of just butchering this place. The
Yeah.
second flip was another train wreck, but we made a couple grand. Me and my partner in the firm did that. And then in '09 through 14, I just bought apartment buildings. So I did 2 flips, the development project of the strip mall, and almost lost it, but then got out of that mess and still had the strip mall. And then I bought these apartment buildings. And I was all in, man. Like, literally every dollar I had, I had loaned out all my life insurance policies. I wasn't doing the infinite banking concept then. I knew I
Yeah.
could take money from the policies. I put that into real estate and down payments. I used my loans for my 401k at the firm. That went into the real estate. And every nickel I made, I'd never forget it. I'd go on the weekends. And again, remember, I wasn't married.
Yeah.
I was still, at this time, I was kind of tailing into my end of my snowboarding career. So snowboarding's winding down. It ended with a bad injury out in Mammoth. But this got me time to go work on real estate. So I would
Yeah.
take the commissions I make or the fees I'd get from the managed money, and I plowed it all into real estate. And that's how I did it. Now, I made a lot of mistakes, and we'll probably cover that. But yeah, that's how I got into real estate.
I love it. Now, in the real estate world, having the ability to either have the capital or have access to the capital is paramount. And so in 2014, the bank that you had been working with decides that, hey, we're going to pull the line of credit. And well, that can be a problem. So talk a bit about, hey, if you don't have, maybe your client that, had a really big practice and was doing well for himself, maybe he could cash flow his own things, right? Or maybe he was able to financially back it all. But for a lot of people in the real estate space, you're borrowing, and in the business space, you're borrowing money to operate the business day in and day out, and you're just, hoping that in the long run this plays out. So talk a little bit about that moment in time for you.
Yeah, like during that whole thing, I didn't know how money worked. I'll be honest. I was a financial advisor. I knew about investments, but I didn't know how money worked. And I was all in on all these properties. I had no liquidity. So it seemed like weekly, there was always a tragedy. A main water line would go, leaky pipe, a basement floods. It was always something that just drained you. But what really got me is the only way I knew to get money to buy these is the bank. So the bank that saved me from bankruptcy and the guy, Greg, who I'm still friends with, for that strip mall, that's who I borrowed from. Same bank, same lender or same mortgage broker, and he served me well. And I remember I got another property. I even remember the property, and I'm pissed off that I didn't end up getting it. I brought that property to the bank, the same bank, with a great proposal on it, and I thought this is a shoe-in. Greg's never going to turn me down. This bank's got a great relationship. I got money in the bank. I got rental going in there. And he did. Like I gave him the proposal. With 2 days later, he called me back. I'm like, wow, see, this is quick. I went in there because he said, I have to talk to you. I went in, and he says, we can't give you the loan. I said, why? And he says, because you don't fit, you're outside the debt to income ratio. And he showed me the numbers, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, these numbers are wrong. Like, that's my income, but you're not using all my rental. He's like, yeah, we don't use all your rental. We use only a percentage of your rental. So when you're buying this new one, that's going to add to your debt, but your income only increases marginally because we can only use a percentage, a very small percentage, of this rental income that's going to come in. So he says it doesn't work. And not only that, because you're outside the realm or the debt to income, and I don't think they do this anymore, probably do. I hate banks, but they pulled my one. I had two lines of credit. One was small, one was larger. I used them all the time for renovations, and they froze it. Like right there, they froze my line of credit. Done, man. It's like I didn't have money to continue the renovations. I couldn't cash flow it because I, like I said, I just wasn't liquid. Everything I had was in these deals, and I thought I was doing everything right. And here's what I did wrong, just so anyone can get a takeaway out of this. I remember from the first property to the 36th door, okay, even almost the 37th. I remember Greg telling me, hey, you can either borrow in the company's name, Syndicated Development was the name of that company. You can either borrow in the entity name or you can borrow in your name. If you borrow in your name, the rate's lower. What would you say?
Yep.
Like, if you knew
Give me
nothing
the lower
about
rate. Lower
give me
rate.
the lower rate. Psh,
Yeah.
giddy up and go. Duh, that's dumb, right? And he's like, well, you just have a little more liability. I'm like, I got insurance, man, and I don't have anything. I'm thinking, like, sue me, right? Like that Rocky movie, sue me. Like, I didn't have anything. Yeah, that was where I went wrong, because when you borrow in your personal name, you will always, by design, hit your debt to income limit. You just will. You can't probably get past, because I used to teach this a lot. And we had the math dialed in to, like, you could get to 8, maybe 10 properties, and you were done, no matter what. And that's effectively what happened. I hit the debt ceiling. And I had to sell off all those properties. Some of them I was happy to get rid of, and some of them, it was terrible that I got rid of them. Think about that. If you could go back to 2009, during the heat or right after the heat of the Great Recession, and buy properties, we were buying them at, I know some of you aren't even going to believe me, but like $20,000 to $30,000 a door.
Yeah.
Like, I was buying 8-unit apartment buildings for like 160 grand. Okay, and they weren't in like areas where you get shot. They weren't great areas, but they weren't like bad areas. But that's just what they sold for back then. Like, if I had that portfolio today, it'd be worth millions and millions of dollars. But I didn't. I sold it off. I barely paid off all the loans. So think of it like all that work and energy and effort, that there came that moment in 14 where when I sold it all, and it all sold relatively quick, I had a little bit of capital, but all I did is paid off my debts. I just paid the bank back. And I was at zero or close to zero, and the bank was whole. And that's a catalyst for like what we do today with being your own bank, is like, I don't like banks. You know,
Yeah.
I've heard these stories and I've been through this, that like banks are not your friends. Banks are not going to be on your side when you need them most. The banks are always going to strike you down when it's absolutely the worst time. And that's what happened to me.
So you now, to your point, have had two frustrating, probably more than two, but two that we can highlight, frustrating events with a bank. We had it when we were younger, man trying to get a loan and, hey, you don't have collateral, so we're not going to give this to you. And then you had it, maybe 10, 15 years later in your business career where all of a sudden you were wanting the money and you had the money, but then the rules of the game got switched mid-game. So this leads into kind of, I would say, from my understanding, you really pressing into the idea of the infinite banking system. And so talk a little bit about, what, what changed in your mind. You're obviously aware of some of the products that help people create that system, but maybe not wholeheartedly diving into that as a business practice, more of like a piece of a pie.
Yeah. So, there's always an aha moment in
Yeah.
most people's lives where something happens that changes your life forever. And that's what I'm going to tell you is that moment. So after I sold all those properties, me and my who now wife, back then she was my girlfriend, then fiance Larissa,
Yeah.
we got this idea that instead of buying apartment buildings, we were going to flip houses because we'd watched a couple shows, we'd gone to this seminar, we signed up for this program, and we were going to be flippers. But we weren't going to just be flippers because we were at this seminar in Las Vegas and we saw Tarek and Christina. We were in the front row, I'll never forget it. Tarek and Christina walked by, got up, gave an awesome talk about like their journey, walked off. And I looked at my wife and I said, someday we're going to have our own show and we're going to be on that stage. And
Mm.
then after that seminar, I came home. I immediately kind of came up with a script for our show that we were going to build a pilot for. It was like Flip or Flop beats Jackass, Bam Margera's Jackass. And
Yeah.
we were already doing houses, so we were going to have my skate team from the shop come in, demo the house, build skateboard ramps throughout the house, film all that. I show up pissed off because they're just screwing off on my time. But then I pull my snowboard out and I drop in off roofs. We have all the footage of all this. But that was like the concept. But we did like my buddy Kyle, who did my videos when I had the shops, because we had
Yeah.
our own video production. He made the sizzle reels. We sent it off to a bunch of producers. We got picked up by one, and they were Toronto-based. They thought they were going to take us all the way. We got super far, and then all of a sudden we were hinging on, they call it green light, a green light from HGTV or it could have been any of the networks to get the distribution. And they said no. They said it was too outside the box. So literally everything unwound there. We ended up, through another guy, getting connected with a different producer that ended up getting us the show. But what happened is, in that second round, that guy that got us connected with Bodega, who was our producer that got us on HGTV, his brother, when I was out in Utah one day, I called his brother up, and they had means, so I had a property and I needed money, and I knew they lent. So I said, hey, can we meet out for lunch? I would like to show you a property. I'd like to borrow some money or see if you would lend. He said, sure, let's meet at Cheesecake Factory. So we meet there, and in the conversation, very early on, before food came out, I just asked him, I don't know, I was a financial advisor. I'm like, so how do you lend all this money? Because I was intrigued. Like, I knew he just lent, and he made a lot of money. And he's like, well, I lend from my private banking system. And being an advisor, you got to understand, like, I'm going to try to categorize everything in boxes, right?
Yeah.
Private bank. Okay, what the heck does Mike have? I thought he had a real bank. But then he just quickly went through this whole thing. I'm going to slow it down. But he says, I got this private bank. And then he starts explaining it. I changed where my money went. I put it into my own bank. Then I take loans from my bank and I lend that money to you. But my money never leaves the account. My money stays in the account, my private bank, as he called it, earning guaranteed interest, dividends, in a tax-free environment. So let's just focus on guaranteed interest, dividends, tax-free. So in my mind as an advisor, it's very simple to articulate those, right? I'm like, guaranteed, that would be CDs, that would be annuities, that fixed annuities, that would be like bank accounts, things like that hold a guarantee. So I had all those. And then he said, dividends. And I'm like, okay, annuities don't pay dividends, CDs don't pay dividends, bank accounts, maybe a credit union pays dividends. I'm like, what the heck? And then when he said tax-free, I'm like, that's a Roth. That's the only thing that could be tax-free out of this bunch. And I'm lost. But he just keeps going. And where he really got me, he kind of, the way he unpacked it, I'm not going to be able to duplicate it, but I'm trying. So he went through all these benefits of his private bank. And I'm like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And then he's like, I take a loan from my private bank, and I lend that money to you. And I charge you 12% and 3 points, 15% effectively. You pay me 15%. I take the interest you give me and I take it right around. He kind of did this almost like a circle. If you ever watch my stuff on YouTube, you always see me drawing circles. This is where it comes from. He said, I take the money you give me and I take it and I put it back in my private bank, which is repaying the loan. But that whole time, and this is where he got me. He says, the money, for sake of it, we'll call it 100 grand. I took 100 grand. He takes it to 100 grand out, lends it to me at 15%. He says, my 100 grand never left the account, which means my 100 grand continued to earn guaranteed interest plus dividends uninterrupted in a tax-free account.
Yep.
When I heard that, I'm just like, whoa, like, I need me one of these. And you know what? If I can just learn this thing, all of my clients will buy this. All of my clients will need this. I just found the fountain of whatever you want to call it, okay? Yeah. So I just say to Mike, which all of you I think would do the same thing, Mike, what is this? And can you teach me this? So he says, Chris, I'm surprised you wouldn't know what this is. So now I feel stupid because he knew I was an advisor. I'm like, well, yeah, what is it? I don't quite I'm not putting it together. And he says it's a specially designed whole life insurance policy from a mutually owned company that pays dividends. And as if he said that to me in a way, or as if I'm just supposed to be like, oh, yeah, dude, of course.
Yeah, right.
When he said that, that was all I heard was whole life. That was the only words I heard. And after that, the rest just got shut out. I'm just like, Mike got bamboozled. Whole life's like the worst place you could put your money, or at least the financial advisor, Chris Naugle, thought. And I didn't say that to him because obviously he knows something I don't. He's the one lending me the money. It's not the other way around. So I'm just like, well, how would I learn about this? And he says, well, I can't teach you. I just use it. But I could turn you on to the guy that showed me, Brent, and he gave me Brent's number. So when I called Brent, I remember just going crazy on the phone with Brent, like so excited. You know, I got blah, 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 blah. I'm an advisor, real estate investor. I don't even know what I said. It was like a blender with its top off. And he stops me and he says, have you watched the 90-minute video yet? I had no idea what this, Mike didn't prep me for this. And I'm like, no. He's like, all right, I'm going to stop the conversation. I'm going to send you my video. It's 90 minutes. When you watch the video, shoot me a message back, and then we'll set up a call. So now I'm like, what? I'm a financial advisor. I want to buy this thing. I want to do this thing. And I got to watch a 90-minute video, which I reluctantly did. And I'll never forget the Sunday with the big cup of coffee and the pad of paper. And I hit play. And 90 minutes went by like 15 seconds, 4 pages of notes. And that's all I need to tell you, folks. Everything right there changed.
Yep.
And it changed my entire life from that point on. That would have been about 2013, 14, give or take a year or two. And I have never not practiced the infinite banking concept. They've never not used it. I use it for everything now. And now I teach it to thousands and thousands of people and set up private banking systems. And that's that catalyst. That was that aha moment in Cheesecake Factory.
Now, I think one of the beautiful things of your story is you've done the financial planning and investing route. You've done the real estate route. You've done the business owner route. You've done the infinite banking. I think for so many people that are, talking figures, they've maybe never done anything else, and they are preaching the only thing they have done because it's what they know, or they've never done something and they're dogging on it because they've never done it and they're just using other experiences to dog on it. So as you had all of these different experiences, it's almost like the atheist that becomes Christian. There's like this extra level of power in their message because you're like, well, you almost believe the exact opposite, and you were willing to change your mind to believe that it was a good thing. So as you made that transition, did you have any hurdles of like, well, I had these preconceived notions, whether it's, well, real estate's a better return, or investing always, give it long enough time will give me a better return than this does. Did you have any hurdles that you had to overcome, or did you really feel like once you understood kind of the ins and outs of it and some of the tax benefits and those things, that it was like, hey, maybe there are some certain arguments you can make, but as a complete package, this is a better strategy for me?
Well, there's definitely arguments you can make, but I never had that moment where I questioned it. And it was very simple to me. The way it
Yeah.
was explained to me with that 90-minute video and all the other learning that I did after that and applying is I wasn't trying to compare the returns that I got from the policy against real estate or
Yep.
against the stock market. You can't do that. It was
Right.
never this or that. It was this and that. Because remember,
Yeah.
all I was doing with this private banking system is what Mike did. I'm replacing a bank account with a specially designed whole life, and then I'm literally performing banking. I'm literally doing banking 101, which, just to keep it easy, is either called privatized banking. That's what it goes back to, the Rockefellers, Rothschilds,
Yep.
Morgans, and Stanleys, privatized banking. But in today's world, R. Nelson Nash, the late R. Nelson Nash, wrote a
Yeah.
book and kind of coined the phrase the infinite banking concepts,
Yep.
which is the banking aspect that allows you, that's that take the loan from the policy, invest the loan, pay the debt down, buy cars, and buy real estate, do private lending, whatever. Over here is just your opportunity zone. And that would be where most people would say, okay, well, it's this or that. But you see, remember, it's this and that, because my money in the whole life policy is still there, still earning interest, still earning dividends, uninterrupted, while I get to use the money immediately. And this is the thing. A lot of people would be like, oh, whole life, it's the worst thing. You can't even use the money. There's no money in it in the first 2 years. Yeah, normal whole life. The whole life Dave Ramsey always talks about, but
Yeah.
not the way these are designed. These have immediate access to your cash value in the first 30 days, or a high percentage of your cash value. So I'm putting money in the whole life, immediately taking that money out as a loan. The insurance company gives you a loan against your death benefit. So if you've got, let's say, 50 grand, or I started with $1,000 a month when I did it.
Yeah.
I had month 3, which is when I took my first loan, I had roughly $2,500, 2 grand,
Yep.
$2,500. I took a loan for that and I paid off a credit card. Okay,
Yep.
that's what I did. That was my first transaction. I'll never forget it. It was a KeyBank credit card. So paid that credit card off. I used to pay that credit card, trying to knock it down a couple $100. I took the couple $100, I paid that credit card, and I paid it back to my banking policy.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the infinite banking concept. Money
Yep.
leaves the policy, goes to work at a higher rate of return or a higher percentage than what the cost of capital is, the loan interest rate from the insurance company, and then I send it back. So that credit card that I paid off was like, I don't know, 12 or 18%, I don't remember.
Yeah.
That's far more than the 4% they used to charge me on loans. So I
Yep.
was making the spread. How do banks make money? They make a spread. But this is the thing people always miss. They're like, I could do that from a bank account. You could, but you wouldn't still have the money in the bank account earning interest. And the dividend crediting yield on
Yep.
these policies, which is the interest plus the dividend, is north of 5%. Like
Yep.
today, it's actually north of 6, but we'll just say north of 5 just to keep it safe. Like that's still, I'm making that, and I'm only paying 4 back then to use it. Now the rates are different. It's like 6 or 6.6, and your
Yeah.
borrow rate's like 5.35. Just so you can kind of see in context, they do change
Huh.
a little bit. And then I'm taking it and I'm paying off a credit card. I'm making a spread, but I'm making money twice on every dollar. But here's the most important thing: when I make that couple $100 payment back to the policy, I have a couple $100 the next day.
Yeah.
I didn't lose any liquidity, where when I paid the debt or the credit card, I lost all the liquidity. So you
Right.
see, it was very simple for me, because I was like, I'm not trying to get a better return. The whole life is going to outpace inflation in most years as an average. It's going to outpace inflation at best. In other words, if you put your money in a specially designed whole life, your internal rate of return is going to be 3 to 5%, depending on the year you look at it. That doesn't get a lot of people out of bed, but it's 3 to 5% tax free. So that's like making 6 to 7% in a taxed investment, maybe more if you're in a high tax rate like I am. So now you're talking something really good, and I have access to it
Mhm.
anytime for anything, anytime I want it. So
Yeah.
then when I get an opportunity, today I use it for buying businesses, incubator companies that we start up. I love Porsches, so I buy Porsches here and there. But I borrow the money from my policy. I buy the item or invest in the item or the business or the real estate. Then I take the return or the payment that I normally would have given away to the bank, and I pay it back to myself. So you see,
It's good.
there is no comparison. It's just
Yeah.
this and that. Sorry I went long on that, but that's an important takeaway.
It's a great takeaway, and two things that I'll point out, and maybe you'll have some extra comments on it, is one, that paying it back is so important. I think that becomes something
Everything.
people forget, and if you don't do that, then you wake up 8 years down the road and you go, "What the heck do I own?" Because it just doesn't work. So that's a really great point. And then the second is, um, I like to say or think about it this way. It's like people try and compare things that have different attributes, right? The apple and a hand grenade. They're both green and they're both relatively hand shaped, but they're completely different things. So you would never bite into a grenade and be like, well, that wasn't nearly as good as an apple. You go, well, yeah, because it was a grenade, right? Like it has a completely different purpose for what you're trying to do than what the apple did. And I think, to your point, as people make conversations and have those dialogues, they're trying to compare something that has risk to it to something that doesn't, or they're trying to compare something that maybe has more upside potential but has significantly bigger downside potential, or no access to money versus access to money. And you're like, you have to look at all of the different things and then figure out how many check marks do you want in your favor, right? And then make the decision based on that.
100%. Like the only true comparison, and we did a whole white paper on this, but the only true comparison is a bank account.
Yeah.
Like that's the only thing you're stacking it up against because that's where your money starts. It's where everybody's money starts. Checking or savings account. Every one of us. We
Yeah.
make our money, and unless it goes into a 401k, which maybe some you could defer, but that's where it's going. So when you compare it, that's what you're comparing because it's just the foundational starting place for your money. It's not where your money's going to sit. It's where your money starts. And then
Mm.
from there, you take the money and you invest the money, you buy assets, you build your wealth. And that's what infinite banking's for. And I think a lot of people try to think that we're telling people, oh, put all of your money in the policy. Absolutely not. We're,
Yep.
we're telling people change where your savings goes, not all of your money. Keep your living expense money, your extra money in your checking account, and then just the money that you would normally save, that you'd put in a savings, a high yield savings, a brokerage account. That's the money you change where it goes.
Yep. That's so good. Now, as you have bought into the system, you've mastered the system, I would say. That has allowed you to speak. It's allowed you to have great content in social media. It's also allowed you to write a couple books. So go ahead, give a quick little tidbit on the book so that way we can encourage people to go out, get Chris's book, and they can learn more from the master.
Yeah, well, we've done 6 books so far. I mean, my favorite one, Mapping Out the Millionaire Mystery, is probably my all-time favorite. That one's kind of about the infinite banking concept. But we wrote a children's book called The Companion.
Oh,
And if
amazing.
you've ever read the Giving Tree
Yeah.
or The Missing Piece, Shel
Uh-huh.
Silverstein, this book is a lot like that, but it has a root in finance, a root in money. But it's just a beautiful story of a little girl and her companion, which is just this little furry thing. But the companion is really the whole life policy. You won't know that reading the book, but you can make the parallels when you hear the story.
Yeah.
And if anyone wanted the books, they can get them all. I mean, except for the companion, you can get every one of my books, all of them except for the newest one that hasn't come out yet, for free. You just go to chrisnaugle.com. There's a part up top that says books. I give all my books away for free. You just got to pay for the
Amazing.
shipping or get the ebooks for free. So that's the books. But I think the greatest gift that I've done is my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I looked at YouTube a long time ago, 8 years ago. I think I started it 7, 8 years ago. And I saw something back then in YouTube. I saw what it reminded me of something I remembered when I was a child. And when I was a child, there were 2 stations on the box, the TV, that you would watch for movies. There was Cinemax. I'm sorry, 3. Cinemax, Showtime, and HBO. For any of you that are older, you remember those.
Yeah.
And you'd go to those, and it just seemed like, on the day where you're clicking through, or back then we actually had turned the dial to get it to turn, every one of them at some point in time would have all the same movie. Maybe the original Top Gun or whatever the popular movie was. You couldn't get a new movie. It was always the same one. And I got thinking about it. And I'm like, there's a reason these stations, these movie houses or whatever you want to call them, would play the same movie. It was because they rated well. So I'm like, okay, on YouTube, YouTube is the HBO, the Cinemax, the Showtime. Me, the content producer, I am the Paramount, the Universal, the Pixar. I'm the producer making the movie. So I can make anything I want. And if I have a movie that comes out really good that people like, YouTube is going to rank it higher and play it. And I figured this out. And I'm like, this is an easy game. I'm going to invest in high quality financial videos that teach these concepts and others, all the skills that I've learned in all these years. And as I
Yeah.
keep learning new skills, I'll keep doing new videos. 1,420 as of today is what we've got on our YouTube channel. All super highly produced. And I spend a fortune producing videos. But that's what I saw. And YouTube's been my greatest investment
Yeah.
because it is the one thing that will outlive me. It's my greatest legacy. My books are great, but you can only get books in so many hands, where the videos, hundreds of millions of people can watch them. So that's how I've done it. And You can watch any of those videos at the Chris Naugle on YouTube.
Love it. Well, Chris, I could talk to you for another 5 hours. I know you're a busy man and you've got a lot to do. So I just want to say thanks so much for coming on, sharing your journey and all the amazing things you've done. And I'm excited to stay connected. And we'll probably have to be doing this again in like 2 or 3 years. Talk about the new book and the additional things that you'll be doing at that point. So
I'd
thanks again,
love
my
it,
man.
man. Yeah, the new book's special. It's kind of my memoir to my daughter.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.